Yay.
Oh, thank you guys.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Great. And now I'm muted. That was rule number 1. Rule number 2, if you can, please turn your video camera on. We want to see your faces. It'll make this all so much better for our storytellers and for everyone here tonight. I'm already seeing so many people that I recognize, a lot of faces that I don't. So thank you for being here with us tonight. We're just so thrilled to have you. I am Lauren Peace. I don't think I introduced myself. I am the public health reporter with Mountain State Spotlight, and I am going to act as your host to the best of my ability tonight. This is the first time in probably a month or 2 that my colleagues are seeing me dressed in normal clothes and not in my pajamas during our typical Zoom meetings. So it's an event for all. At the beginning of the show and at the end of the show, we are going to have a really quick poll. It's 4 questions. It's going to pop up. If you could fill them out for us, it just gauges trust in journalism. It'll ask you whether you're a subscriber, really easy stuff. That would be much appreciated. So again, we're going to throw that up in a second, and then you're going to get the same one at the end of the show. And outside of that, we're going to roll. We're going to get to our storytellers. We have some really amazing stories tonight, and I'm excited for you all to hear them. So let's start with the poll, and then we'll get into our stories.
Just for me, baby. Okay. Oh, there's always gonna be pressure. Okay. Pressure. Nothing's ever worse than work, I noticed. Freelance now, yeah, I guess you earned it. Life is only wishing we could load.
All right, fantastic. So you got the first poll done. We'll have another one at the end of the show. And now for the fun part, introducing our storytellers. The first is a name that the vast majority of you already know. He came to Charleston, West Virginia in 1998. Not to make you feel old, Eric, but that's when my brother was born. So, and he's covered since living here everything from health to education. His most notable reporting, though, was on the opioid crisis. I first met him actually shortly after he won his Pulitzer. It was in 2017, and I was living in Rochester at the time and trying to find my way back home to West Virginia. And so I used it as an excuse, just a little, hey, congrats on your Pulitzer. Are you guys hiring? Excuse to send a message. And I drove down and I met him at the Gazette mailroom then, and it was another 3 years until we got to work at the same organization. But he is a wonderful colleague, a friend. We're so excited to have him telling a story tonight. Introducing Eric Eyre.
Woo! Yeah. Woo.
Thanks, Lauren. Four years ago today, I snapped awake in the middle of the night, grabbed a reporter's notebook and pencil beside the bed, and jotted down 9 words that would change my life and the trajectory of the opioid crisis. Follow the pills and you'll find the overdose deaths. When I woke up the next morning, I had a problem. I was having trouble deciphering my own handwriting. You see, I suffered from a condition I would later learn called mycographia. It's handwriting that's exceedingly small and gets smaller as you write more words. It's also a telltale symptom of Parkinson's disease. 5 months earlier, I sat with my wife Lori in an exam room at Cabell Huntington Hospital. Dr. Vikram Shivkumar, a neurologist, stepped into the room. I told him about my symptoms, the small handwriting, the difficulty sleeping, my foot dragging when I walked, balance problems, the extreme stiffness in my muscles and joints, the small tremor in my right hand. It took him all of a couple of minutes to give me a diagnosis. You have Parkinson's. Well, I couldn't have Parkinson's. I didn't want to have Parkinson's. It's a progressive neurological disease with no known cure. I was only 51 at the time. Most people, I thought, didn't get Parkinson's until their 60s or 70s or 80s. I was in a state of denial and disbelief. The diagnosis couldn't have come at a worse time. At the Gazette-Mail, I was getting closer and closer to uncovering the secrets and lies of giant prescription drug distributors that were dumping huge numbers of opioids in small towns across West Virginia's southern coal fields. My reporting on the addiction crisis actually had started back in the summer of 2013 with a tip about West Virginia's new Attorney General, Patrick Morrisey, and his close ties to the distributors. We eventually went to court, the newspaper, and we were aided by 2 pro bono lawyers, that means free, WVU law professor Pat McGinley and Boone County lawyer Tim Conaway, and pried loose some of the shocking court filings that the drug companies had fought for years to keep hidden from the public. Of course, I was keeping my own secrets. Other than my bosses at work and my immediate family, I hadn't told anyone that I had Parkinson's. I started attending boxing classes for people with Parkinson's at a dingy gym in North Charleston. It's across the parking lot from a drug rehab center. High-intensity exercise helps slow the progression of the disease, and there's nothing quite like punching a heavy bag for an hour to get out your frustrations. Thanks to trainers like Jamie Tridico, Ryan Fitzer, and Tori Charlie, I kept slugging away in the boxing gym and on the opioid beat. By November that year, it was 2016, using the Freedom of Information Act, I got my hands on some previously confidential DEA data that showed the drug distributors had flooded the state with OxyContin and hydrocodone. They're 2 highly addictive and powerful painkillers. Take too many and they can kill you. And that's exactly what was happening in West Virginia, a record number of overdose deaths year after year after year. The drug wholesalers distributed a disproportionate number of pain pills to poor rural counties in southern West Virginia. Those counties also had the highest overdose death rates in the nation. The largest shipments often went to mom and pop drug stores in small towns. One such pharmacy in Kermit, West Virginia, you probably heard of it, was shipped more than 12 million pain pills in 3 years to a town with only about 400 people. That's 12 million pills to a town of 400 residents. The drug companies couldn't dispute the numbers. They were the ones that reported the sales data directly to the DEA. In the newsroom, we had talked about postponing the opioid story until the following year. But the legislature would be in session for 2 months, starting in mid-January. And as a State House reporter, I'd be responsible for covering that. I was determined to finish the piece by the middle of December. Parkinson's had put me on an accelerated deadline. Suddenly, I was motivated by a ticking clock. I was confronted with my own mortality. It was now or never. Of course, the opioid epidemic wasn't a story about data and statistics. It was about people, our neighbors, our families, our coworkers, our friends. Just about everyone knew somebody who was battling addiction or somebody who had overdosed and died. A drug counselor in Boone County helped me find families who had lost loved ones, families torn apart. They wanted to share their stories. They wanted somebody to listen and care. Our photographer, Sam Owens, brought a box of tissues to every interview. One woman in Madison, Kay Mullins, told us she had tried to call the doctor who had written the painkiller prescription that killed her daughter. She got a receptionist instead. And this is what she said. I told her my daughter was there December 20th. Y'all wrote these prescriptions and she's gone on December 23rd. I just wanted to let you know she won't be coming back. Kay now is taking care of her granddaughter, a heroin addict. The story rolled off the presses on deadline and it hit like a thunderclap. I fielded hundreds of emails and phone calls from families impacted by the opioid crisis, from Vermont to Florida, from West Virginia to Alaska. They were astonished about the sheer number of pain pills that flooded our state. Many believed that the same thing was happening in their communities. Years later, we would find out they were right. The story shifted the conversation over responsibility for the opioid crisis. Purdue Pharma, I'm sure you've heard of them. They're the makers of OxyContin. They had shouldered much of the blame, and justifiably so. Purdue peddled Oxy as non-addictive. But my story introduced America to a new set of cohorts in crime. They're called the Big Three, the three largest drug distributors in America: McKesson, Cardinal Health, and AmerisourceBergen. So 4 months later, I'm back at Dr. Shiv Kumar's office. My wife Lori is with me. How's it going? He asks. I tell him I'm doing just fine. Then Lori blurts out, he won a Pulitzer Prize last week. All I could do was nod. The doctor stared at us like we had lost our freaking minds. Sure you did. I expected him to spring a new round of cognitive tests on me, like the one our outgoing president had once touted to show off his mental acuity. You know, person, woman, man, camera, TV. You might already know the rest of the story. The newspaper went bankrupt and was sold. Congress launched an investigation into pill dumping in West Virginia. Thousands of lawsuits were filed against the drug distributors. We intervened in federal court along with the Washington Post and forced the companies to release their painkiller shipment numbers for the entire nation. And I wrote a book that was published in late March, the same period when COVID made its first surge. I joined Mountain State Spotlight over the summer. I'm privileged to work for an all-star lineup of watchdog reporters. I'll continue to cover the opioid crisis, which isn't going away. In fact, by all accounts, it seems to be getting worse amid the pandemic. They say the opposite of addiction is connection, and there's little connection going on these days. It's a difficult time to do group therapy, one of the hallmarks of starting people on the road to recovery. COVID-19 hasn't been kind to people with Parkinson's either. We haven't had boxing class since early March. For now, we'll have to make do with virtual boxing. Indeed, Parkinson's is no picnic. It presents new challenges every day. For instance, I've lost most of the manual dexterity in my right hand, so I have to type almost exclusively with my left hand, though I sometimes can get an assist with my right middle finger when it's not shaking. I'd show you my middle finger. On second thought, you might get the wrong idea. I'm still managing the disease with a heavy dose of exercise. I'm also blessed I found an entirely new group of friends in the Parkinson's community. We're all on the same boat in choppy waters, but we keep going, we keep moving, we keep fighting. And in case you're wondering, yes, I'm also still keeping a reporter's notebook and a pencil beside the bed at night. You never know when inspiration might strike. Thanks for listening.
Wow.
Bravo.
Yeah.
Bravissimo.
Wow.
Yay, very nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And I was going to show you guys Eric's book and pitch you to buy it, but I only have the cover. I'm not sure where it went. I think maybe I lent it out to a friend. But if you can hop online, I know Ken just threw in the chat that you can get it through bookshop.org and support a local bookshop. So it's kind of a 2-in-1, and it's really worth your read. But thanks so much, Eric. That was amazing. All right, let's move on to our next storyteller. W.I. Bill Hairston moved to Charleston, or just outside of it, southern West Virginia, in 1960 from Alabama. And he has been here ever since. He is an Appalachian storyteller, a musician, a pastor, and we are so thrilled to have him here with us tonight. So without further ado, applause for W.I. Bill Hairston.
Woo.
Right. Revelation. We live it in.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Lauren. You know, well, I just want to tell a simple story about my life in West Virginia. I tell a lot of stories about my life in West Virginia, but I want to take you back to 1970. Now, that's a long time ago, but I went to 1970 because for me, it was a very interesting time in my life. I was a hippie. Now, I wasn't just a hippie. I was a Black hippie. That was unique. Now, in the summertime, well, in the wintertime, I would wear bell-bottom jeans, and I would have like sandals on. And in the summertime, I would wear cutoff jeans, and I'd be barefoot. I was a sight for sore eyes, as they say, particularly because there was one thing especially different about me. I had an afro, yeah. Hair all over the place. And it was a really sort of great time. I was hired by West Virginia University Extension Service to do what they called opportunity camps. These were camps in the summertime for children 9 to 12 years old. And it was sort of a reaction to Lyndon Baines Johnson's War on Poverty. It was taking the children within every county who were the poorest kids, the lowest income kids in the county, putting them together in one place for a week, and then introducing these kids to all kinds of things, buy them shoes, buy them clothes, introduce them to new foods, and just a whole different group of things in a residential camp setting where the kids got all this different experience. The idea was if you could give them these this kind of introduction, that these were things that they would want, and these were things that would help them sort of hope and get out of certain situations. Here I was, I'd gone to Cabell County, I'd gone to Mercer County, and then I was sent to Webster County. There's a big difference between those other two and Webster. You see, in 1970, Webster County, West Virginia, had absolutely zero people of color. I'm not just talking about Black people. They had zero people of color. Everybody in Webster County was white. Now, I was sent there to be one of the camp counselors in this opportunity camp for children in low-income families. The man who ran that camp and who was in charge of that camp, I'll never forget him, his name was Mr. Burton. Mr. Burton was an older gentleman. I call him an old white man. Now, Mr. Burton, well, if you've ever seen one of these stories or TV shows or whatever from the 50s, you'll notice that all the men wore suits and ties and hats. Mr. Burton wore suit and tie and hat. He was unique. He was about 20 years past the time, because you see, in the 70s, people were wearing leisure suits and all kinds of other kinds of stuff, platform shoes. But Mr. Burton, an older white gentleman, had on his suit, his tie, and his hat. And I thought to myself, uh-oh, this black hippie and Mr. Burton, is this going to work? Well, the kids looked at me. Now, what you have to understand is that these children were kids who never had left the county. They were the poorest kids in the county. They had never left their county. In fact, they had never seen anybody black. The best they could do was to maybe see somebody on TV. And in 1970, I assure you, there weren't that many black people on TV. And these were the poorest kids in the county. And a lot of them didn't even have TVs. So to look at me was a sight for those kids. I was definitely a unique experience. Well, one of the kids almost immediately that first day came up to me, looking at me, and looked at my hair and grabbed my hair just out of curiosity, just wanting to touch the hair, and it aggravated me. And I said to the kid, "Don't touch my hair." And Mr. Burton heard that, saw that, and he called me over. I should tell you that Mr. Burton had a reputation of being a man who was very, very intelligent. I'd never experienced him before, but he called me over right after that incident, took me in a room, and he looked right at me and he said, "You aren't getting it, are you?" I said, "Getting it?" He said, "You're not getting it." He said, "I purposely asked for you. I'd seen you before in another setting, and I purposely wanted you here in this place, in this camp with these kids. I wanted these kids to experience somebody black, somebody different from them, somebody they'd never seen, and you are the one." He said, "Your job here is to be a gift to these kids. Your job here is to give these kids an experience that they're not going to ever have unless they have it with you right here and now." And I thought to myself, oh my. And I listened to Mr. Burton. I left that room, I went out, and I started interacting with those kids. I let them touch my hair. I let them sit on my lap. I let them ask me some of the dumbest questions in the world. "Do you eat peanut butter?" The questions that were just absolutely outrageous. But I let them ask, and I answered the questions. And we started learning, they started learning things about me. They started learning that I ate pinto beans and cornbread just like they did. I listened to Tom T. Hall, the country music singer, just like they did. That, by the way, was something a friend of mine, Newman Jackson, had introduced me to that same period of time. They asked me questions about what I ate, what all these and they figured out that this guy had a lot in common with them. In fact, they were just so fascinated. We had a wonderful time that week. We had a great time. One of the kids even said, "You remind me so much of my big brother." I guess it had happened. The kind of things, it just happened. And as the kids left, and I waved goodbye because I was to be one of the last people to leave. Mr. Burton, that old white man with the suit and the tie and the hat. He came over and he looked at me and he said, "You did what I wanted you to do. You made a difference. You were a gift to these kids. You did it." Now, I'm not going to tell you that when those kids graduated from school and left the county and started interacting with people, that they became some kind of social justice soldiers that hit the world and made a difference. I don't know that. I don't know. But some of you could be on here right now listening to me. I don't know that. What I do know is what Mr. Burton taught me. That old white man in his suit and his tie and his hat taught me that I could be a gift to West Virginia, that I could be someone who was able to do no more than introduce people. By the way, the percentage in West Virginia right now is about the same, 3%. The opportunities out there, and I have spent the last, almost 50 years doing what Mr. Burton wanted me to do. That's be a gift to my state, a gift. I love it. And I'm glad I met Mr. Burton.
That was wonderful. What a lesson. What a lesson.
That's no school.
Good job, Bill.
That was amazing. Bill, thank you so much for being a gift to the state and a gift to the storytelling event tonight. For you, those of you out there who haven't heard from Bill before, there are archives and archives of stories told by Bill. He's a professional storyteller. There's a great profile of him on, I think it's wvfolklife.org. Hopefully someone has dropped it in the chat for you to go check it out. And I hope that we'll have the opportunity to have him back again, telling more stories in the future. Terrific. So when we sent you guys the Eventbrite link, I think you were asked a question. Some of you answered it, some of you didn't. It was, tell us about an experience you had that could only happen in West Virginia. And so I am going to read through a few of these right now. We'll see what we have. A few weeks ago, I was walking in a park. I passed a woman walking in the woods carrying a possum and a baby sling. Okay. Oh man. Don Blankenship insulted me to my face at the Logan County Country Club. I've never been to West Virginia, but my brother lived there for a few years. He moved there from the Philippines and was faced with both graceful hospitality and crippling racism. He worked as a doctor and remembers multiple occasions where white people rejected care from him because of his race. Like many young West Virginians, I wanted desperately to move out of the state. Then, the summer after graduating from Athens High School, I was in a terrible car accident. After being in a coma, in ICU for 4 weeks, and in the hospital longer, I was sent home. A few days later, women from our town came to the house and presented my parents with a schedule of when each would care for me so that my mother could return to work. These kindnesses continued as I started class at Concord College. I learned what community means, and I'm so glad to still call West Virginia home. Great. So a little bit more about this event before we move on to our next storyteller. We're halfway through our stories for the evening, and then once we get to the end, we're going to invite you guys to stay on and hang out in breakout rooms with us. It sounds scary and like a meeting, but I promise you, we are all starved for, at least I am starved for social interaction, and it'll be really fun to get to chat with people around our state. We launched Mountain State Spotlight in the middle of a pandemic, which is maybe the craziest thing a news organization can do. But it's been a really great start so far. In normal times, we would love to gather with you guys at a bar, have a drink, talk face to face, but we've been waiting and we've been waiting and we've been waiting, and the world is continuing to drag on in the way that it is. And so we thought, let's do this virtually. And that's what we're doing now. We hope it's working. We would love your feedback. None of us are tech whizzes, so this is really an experiment. And so far, I've been so thrilled that the Wi-Fi has held up. I thought we were gonna have to drop our reporter, Lucas Manfield's frontier stories in here to explain why our connections were failing, but so far so good. So moving on to our next storyteller. She's another journalist for Mountain State Spotlight. She's a Rand, West Virginia native, moved out of the state, was living in Nashville for a little while, and then moved back here. She's a mom to 2 girls. One of them may or may not be named after a Tudor's biscuit. It's sort of up in the air. We'll let you guys decide. But she's an award-winning journalist. She covers poverty and hunger in our state. She's my friend, my coworker. Give it up for Amelia Ferrell Knisely.
People up there. No, 150.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Lauren. I am not going to confirm or deny about my daughter Dottie's name and how it was inspired. I'll let you all guess on that one. As Lauren said, I write about poverty here in West Virginia, which many of you know is one of the poorest states in the country. And poverty really intersects with every part of life here: education, healthcare, foster care, addiction, and more. I was born and raised here, and as Lauren said, I came home from Nashville last year to write about poverty, which honestly felt really heavy and still does. It's a topic that requires sensitivity, nuance, and a lot of work dispelling stereotypes about Appalachia. I was sitting at my desk last year at the Charleston Gazette-Mail, pregnant, probably snacking, when I got a phone call on my desk phone. I was pretty new to my job, and the woman who called me had read I was covering poverty. She wanted me to come to a tiny town I'd never heard of named Dill. It's in Clay County in central West Virginia, and it takes a few hours to get there from Charleston due to the dirt and windy roads you have to go on. The woman who called me told me that elderly women were running a tiny food pantry out of a church, and they were feeding hundreds of people every month, which was more than half of the community it served. But she really wanted me to understand that the pantry was struggling. There was hardly any food, and the need was growing, and she stressed the needs were much deeper than food. The woman had volunteered in Dill after the town was hit hard by the 2016 floods in our state, and she said the area had never really recovered, not just from the floods that had ruined people's homes that they couldn't afford to fix, but the town was also struggling from a systemic and common issue in West Virginia: what it looks like when coal moves out, the grocery store closes, and nothing moves in. I went to the state archives and found photos of Dill in the mid-1900s. It had a school, a YMCA, even a movie theater. It was nothing like that now, just a single one-room post office. That was the only business in the entire town. The woman who called me told me that she was trying to get this community help, and she'd called lawmakers and nonprofits, and her calls were ignored or nothing came through. Because I cover poverty in West Virginia, I get a good amount of phone calls and emails about causes, and they're all important, like putting shoes on kids and feeding families. It can be hard because as a reporter, I know I can't write about every struggling pantry or every person who's struggling in our state, but this call felt different and I trusted my gut. A few weeks later, my photographer and I met the woman who called me on the side of I-79 to follow her to Dill. She told us we want to follow her because pretty soon we'd be on a dirt road and we'd lose cell service. After a very windy and bumpy drive, we crossed a tiny wooden bridge and parked in front of a small Nazarene church. Two elderly women greeted us with the biggest smiles, and one was the pastor. We went into the church, and within a few steps, we were standing in the room the size of a home bathroom. This was their food pantry, and it was pretty much empty. There were a few packs of spaghetti, a few of those huge bags of rice that would take months to cook through, but most of the shelves were completely bare. There are 300 people in Dill and the neighboring town of Wyden, and the pantry was serving more than half of the community with hardly any food and a shoestring budget. The pastor, known as Pat, told me there were times that people were showing up and they had nothing to give them. She teared up when she told me, "We really care about them and we would love to see them lifted up somehow." It's hard to put into words how I felt that day, standing in a pretty much empty pantry, surrounded by empty boxes as my photographer clicked away. I felt the pain of these women who knew kids and families were going hungry in their community and they really didn't know what to do about it. There were some big issues that kept this community from getting the food it needed. First, it was hidden and pretty much forgotten because there are no jobs there. There's no major grocery store in the entire Clay County, much less this small town. Second, the women who ran the pantry were volunteers. They didn't have experience overseeing a pantry or writing grants, so they were trying to learn. And they weren't being paid for all of that work. Most importantly, the church just didn't have the money to fund the pantry. The church ran a small thrift store that brought in about $50 on a good week, but an order of food from Mountaineer Food Bank costs around $500 per month. I looked at the pantry's monthly ordering sheets and saw that $90 of that $500 total was for processing fees, not for food. And the church couldn't afford the food bank's delivery fee, so they were often left with less food or figuring how to pick up food from the food bank in Braxton County. That same day I visited the food pantry for the first time, I drove around Dill to get a sense of the community. And I saw some of the worst poverty I've seen in my nearly 10-year reporting career. I stumbled into a homeless encampment in the middle of nowhere, and a family of 6 was cooking a single onion and a green pepper over an open fire to feed everyone. It was a heartbreaking scene that I know I'll never forget. I ended up going to Dill 3 times before I published this story last September. This isn't the norm in daily journalism. We typically spend a day or maybe even a few hours in a town to write a story. And it was really a gift that my editors trusted me and gave me the space to write a story. So it wouldn't just be about a struggling food pantry. It could be a story about the systemic poverty in our state, the complications of getting food to a rural town, and what it looks like when coal moves out and generations stay because they don't have options or they don't want to leave. One of the 3 times I went back, the woman I was supposed to interview didn't show up. So I sat on the floor of the food pantry and helped the volunteers unpack hangers and food. And I really got to know these women. And that time spent in Dill was never wasted. It was all helping me tell a nuanced story of poverty and hunger in West Virginia. My story came out last fall, and after it was published, there was a flood of donations to the pantry, and not just single-time donations, there were long-term commitments from citizens and businesses to continue to support it. I got emails from all over the country, as you know, and is evident in this chat. When people leave West Virginia, they like to stay in touch with their home state, and my story had gotten to them and they wanted to help. The church ended up expanding the pantry to accommodate all the donations. The story helped the pantry, and I'm really proud of that. Though poverty still exists in this community, I actually went on the Facebook page for the pantry this afternoon and saw they were collecting donations for a woman in their community who was living in a garage without heat or food. This story also opened the door for me to focus my reporting on the layers of hunger and food access in West Virginia. 1 in 4 kids in our state don't have access to enough food. I stress in my writing that the state relies on Band-Aids for this issue, and those Band-Aids are small church pantries with unpaid volunteers like the one I wrote about, and there are many, many more like it in the state. The state also loves to show off those one-time big donations with those huge cheesy checks. But the reality is West Virginia officials don't invest any state dollars into food access, despite us having some of the highest hunger numbers in the country. I've talked to food bank employees who want the state to buy refrigerated trucks because most food pantries, like the one I wrote about, are on a very tight budget and they can't afford a refrigerated truck that would really make a difference in hauling fresh produce and meat into communities that don't have affordable and healthy options. COVID-19 has made hunger worse in West Virginia, especially for kids out of school. We lead the country in serving free school food because so many kids rely on these free meals. For Mountain State Spotlight this summer, I jumped on a school bus in Kanawha County and rode along as a bus driver and a teacher handed out food to children hidden out of sight from the main roads. The bus driver told me if she hadn't delivered their lunch, she knew those kids wouldn't have eaten that day. That's a really hard reality to accept, and I don't accept it. And that's why I keep writing about this, to keep our lawmakers accountable for hunger and for programs we're paying for that don't work. This legislative session, as the pandemic continues, I'll be watching for any hunger-related legislation. Thank you so much for listening to my story behind the story. I'm really grateful to be home and to write about poverty and hunger here. And it's my hope that one day hunger will not be as big of a part of my beat because people in power will turn their attention and money toward this issue. Thank you.
Thank you for your work.
Yeah.
Wow.
You're recording.
All right. Thank you, Amelia, for sharing that story. We are coming down the final stretch of our show tonight. We have one storyteller left. And his story actually complements Amelia's really nicely. Amelia nicely. I didn't do that on purpose, but anyway, it is also about hunger in West Virginia, but it highlights a grassroots effort to try and address it. When I first heard about this storyteller, it was when I was back home in Morgantown. We're both Morgantown natives. And it was just, I caught wind of this great organization called Pantry Plus operating in Mon County. The first time I heard about it, it was nothing more than sort of a group of rowdy volunteers getting together to distribute food out of their cars. And as you're going to hear in this story, it's grown into so much more. So let's get to it. Introducing Rourke Sizemore.
Woo.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. And before I jump into it, I just want to say I'm completely honored to even be considered on this panel with the first three storytellers. Those were absolutely amazing stories, and thank you for that. So I'm just going to hop right in. Some of my earliest memories as a child are of my parents kind of scooping me up, whether I wanted to go or not, whether I was too young or not, and taking me to service events. It wasn't something that needed a reason. It didn't need a holiday. There was no reason for it, right? It was just part of our lives. And my mom in particular, she used to always tell me this thing. It was really simple. And I remember it around like 6 or so, is she said that if you can help, you should help. And it's as simple as that. And so from a really young age, I tried to internalize that. So we fast forward a little bit. And I'm in middle school, and I'm trying to figure out kind of, how do I make helping part of my life? And so I'm playing basketball on the middle school team. So I grabbed, the 14 other kids on the team. We're all 6th grade middle school boys, right? So we decide we're going to start working at a charity, and it's called Circle of Friends. And essentially what it is it's Saturdays and Sundays, groups come in and cook home cooked meals. And then at like 4 o'clock, we open up for a big dinner for anyone that wants it. We set up the tables, so we're all eating together. It's a nice community event. And then sometimes there's like a little basketball game at the end because it happened in a church on like a church basketball court. So it was this amazing experience, and you can imagine what 15 middle school boys looks like in the kitchen. We got better over the years and months, but at some point in the end of our 7th grade year, one weekend, a student that we went to school with came in to the dinner, and I remember that moment like it was yesterday. It shocked me, and it ashamed me, right? I think all of us know that, you know, some people have more and some people have less, right? Maybe you've seen the statistics, right? That 1 in 5 kids in West Virginia are food insecure, right? But it doesn't really all put together, or it didn't for me until it was real, right? It was in front of me where I couldn't look away, right? And so in that moment, kind of made like a quiet promise or a commitment that I'm never going to look away because it makes me uncomfortable. I'm never not going to see things because they're hard, right? Or because they make me feel powerless. And so in that moment, I knew I had to do better, right? I had to do more and had to be engaged. So fast forward a little bit from there, and I'm in high school, right? And so I'm trying to start a service club at high school. And essentially what I'm doing with folks is putting them into different service events to see what makes them passionate, right? To see ways that we can get into an issue and really make a difference in it. And so I like to call that like a survey of service. And so by the end of that year, I was in a mentorship class with our local county commissioner. Because at the time I had thought maybe politics is the way that I can help folks. And, you know, we went through most of the year and we were doing things like flag raising and filling out paperwork and going to meetings and always more meetings for stuff that we never did. And so I wanted to do something real, right? I wanted to get my hands dirty. I wanted to make some kind of real impact. And so for that, me and the county commissioner, we saw this story on Facebook. And it was this principal in North Carolina, and he had essentially just been bringing in anything he could get his hands on into school and giving it out to students who needed it, right? Whether it was a washing machine or a bed or clothes or food. You know, he was trying to make kids just have to worry about being kids, right? Not whether they have food, not whether they have clothes, none of that stuff that no kid should have to worry about. So we kind of took that idea and made it a little bit more formal. And so we opened up pantries inside of public schools. And so these pantries cover food, clothing, school supplies, and personal hygiene products. And kids can come anytime they want, take as much as they want, as often as they want. Which I've found to be such an important thing, because there's these ideas, right, that people in need are going to take too much, right? That they're going to get in there and just abuse programs, right? And I think this idea is fundamentally wrong. And the reason is, when you think about our own lives, right? Like, what kind of food do you have in your fridge? Is it just the stuff you're going to eat today? It's not, right? You have more things. You have some things that you might not even eat, right? And in modern society, right, we hail these people who push and get ahead and fight for everything they can. And then we see somebody in poverty do that, and that's the worst thing in the world, right? We hate that. It's bad. They shouldn't get help anymore. And so fighting that idea, right, that asking for help is a bad thing, that it makes you weak, that there's something fundamentally different about people in poverty, something that's different about you, right, if you're not in that situation. Those things are just wrong, right? The experience at that dinner for me was essentially showing me that it could be me, right? That poverty is not something for someone else, and it's not a problem for other people. It's a problem for all of us. And I think that it takes a lot of different ways to kind of feel that the way folks look, the way they talk, the color of their skin, anything like that, is not really a determining factor in whether somebody needs help or doesn't need help, right? One of the most common things that I run into, right, is folks say, well, I saw them with an iPhone, right? Or they had those nice new clothes. And the iPhone one always kills me, right? Because for a lot of people in West Virginia, that's probably your only internet access, right? That's how you join something like this. That's how kids are doing their Zoom classes. And it's a piece of it that you don't even think about, right? And then people will ask, well, don't you get a government phone, right? Well, government phones have specific minutes, right? So if you have a kid who's doing online school now, how many minutes do you think you have to use, right? Things become a lot more nuanced when you actually look at how these things work, right? And I think it's one of the benefits of like the journalism that's happening from some of the other storytellers, is that it shines a light on these issues, that they're not these black and white things. The world doesn't happen in hard yeses and hard nos, right? It's a world of variations of colors, right? And so we have to start thinking about issues of food, exactly like the storyteller before me, right? That really all these charities, this story I'm telling you, I'm providing a Band-Aid for a problem that needs a massive surgery. And no matter how much pantries do, no matter how many times we draw attention to folks doing great work, we're not going to get to a point where every person in the state is food secure. That's just the truth of it. My greatest hope is to not have a pantry anymore. It's to be put out of business, meaning that no one needs it, right? And to me, those things only happen through communities deciding that it's not acceptable to them, right? This story is kind of my story of saying it wasn't acceptable to me, that I had to do something, right? And so until we make decisions like that and kind of attack from every avenue, it's a really, really hard issue to make any real progress with. And don't get me wrong, I think charity efforts are amazing. That's why I spend a huge portion of my time doing it, because that puts real food in a real person's belly, and there's no substitute for that. And people need help right now, right? They can't wait. And so it's a really tough situation that West Virginia is in, fighting this when we're doing things like, trying to put work requirements on SNAP benefits and making it harder for folks to get the help they need. Yeah, so thank you so much for having me and letting me talk.
Oh.
Yeah.
Woo!
Oh.
Woo! Great. Thank you so much, Rourke, for joining us tonight and for sharing that. I saw some people asking in the chat after Amelia spoke where they can donate to help out with hunger in the state. And I'm hoping that we can get the link to Rourke's website in there. It's pantryplusmore.org. That's a Monongalia County focused organization, but there are others across the state. All right. So it is 8:07. We are right on track. Don't leave yet. Stay with us. We have a surprise guest that's coming up in a few minutes. You'll want to stay and you'll want to see it. But first, I'm going to ask my team if we can launch the final poll. We'll get you guys doing that. It'll take about a minute, and then I will segue on out of here, and we'll get on to our grand surprise. All right, the poll.
Like a little boy, he grew up to be doing all the complaints. His mama said he never knew what the future holds for him, 'cause he was so tender to become a good man.
All righty. Thank you for filling that out. I should have clarified before we started because I got a message from the wonderful Molly Bourne, who's another West Virginia reporter, as well as my mother, who was on this call asking if it was supposed to be the exact same one as the one before. It is. So if you did the same one that you just did, or that you had done at the beginning, you did it right. Okay, I'm going to read 2 more of these submissions that we got from you guys about tell us about an experience you had that could only happen in West Virginia. I love this one. It says, I never thought I'd find myself on top of the Robert Byrd radio telescope at Green Bank. But there we were doing a television feature after the big dish was refurbished a few years ago. Nearly 500 feet in the air on an enormous erector set that moves up and down and twists like a ballerina. My first encounter with the telescope was unreal. Every encounter is unreal. And then the next one, the final one that I'm going to read tonight, driving back from Morgantown to Parkersburg on the evening of the 4th of July, little firework displays up the hollers every few miles, little celebrations, and then like 10,000 exclamation points, which is someone who types like I do, and I appreciate that. Okay, so I am going to segue. No, I'm not going to do that yet. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about this event. We've been doing them with newspapers across the country. My team at Back Pocket, which is separate than Mountain State Spotlight, host these storytelling events, and we're using them as a way to sort of see how we can play with engagement journalism, how we can build trust with an audience, which is why you guys got the polls. We did one in Long Beach, California. Our most recent was with the Tampa Bay Times, and I have to tell you guys, the competitor in me is like freaking stoked because little West Virginia had the most participants out of all of the events that we've done so far. So applaud yourself really briefly for being here and being so awesome and sticking with us. Your support means everything. A shout out to the Back Pocket team who helped make this possible. Allison, Allie, Nico, Tay, Carissa, McCardle, you guys are the best. They're dropping info about Back Pocket in the Zoom group. And if you work at a publication that isn't Mountain State Spotlight, because I know there are a lot of journalists here tonight, and you're interested in hosting one of these events, hit us up because we're down to do it. Okay, so on to the final piece of the night before the breakout rooms. It is my pleasure to introduce our next guest, who is going to introduce our surprise final guest. He is the co-founder of Mountain State Spotlight. I slipped into his DMs back in January or December, again, desperately trying to come home to West Virginia. And he responded, and next thing I knew, we were on email, and now here we are as colleagues. He is a genius, a longtime West Virginian who's reported on coal and environmental issues in the state, a fellow Scorpio. We learned that the other day. And I'm so proud to call him a colleague and a friend. Please give it up for Ken Ward Jr. I forgot, Ken, that we weren't going to applaud for you. I'm sorry, that was my fault. Ken Ward Jr. On to Ken.
Yeah, no one wants to applaud for me. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Lauren. We're so glad that you're home in West Virginia. Thanks to Eric and Amelia, our managing editor, Erica Peterson, executive editor, Greg Moore, and to our guests, Maria, Bill, and Rourke, for telling stories that made this event so special. Our mission at Mountain State Spotlight is to help West Virginians make our state a better place by producing journalism that exposes abuses of power by government, business, and other institutions. We're explaining complex issues, illustrating how public policy decisions affect real West Virginians. We're lifting up voices of those who might not otherwise be heard. And in the spirit of the late Gazette publisher Ned Chilton and sustained outrage, we're keeping after those stories until positive changes are made. But we can't do any of this without you, without our fellow West Virginians, our neighbors. Mountain State Spotlight is a new kind of journalism outfit, a civic news organization. Our stories aren't hidden behind a paywall. We believe all West Virginians deserve the information they need. So we rely on your donations and the philanthropy of other backers to fuel our journalism. So please do support us. Visit our website, mountainstatespotlight.org, to contribute. Donations made through the end of December are doubled by our friends at Newsmatch. And support us in other ways. Read our stories, share them, Sign up for our email newsletter. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Give us feedback about what you like and don't like about what we're doing. Most importantly, help us investigate. We believe in the concept of nothing about you without you. So we want you to tell us the stories in your corner of West Virginia that need to be told. Email us at contact@mountainstatespotlight.org with your tips. And finally, I'm going to shut up. But first, I have the distinct privilege of introducing a friend to me, a friend to Mountain State Spotlight, and a friend to all West Virginians. He needs no big introduction from me. He's the founder and host of Mountain Stage, a West Virginia treasure, if there ever was one, Larry Gross.
Well, thanks a lot, Ken, for giving me the opportunity to step in here and do a song for you and Mountain State Spotlight. It's something I really appreciate and something that I support, and I hope that all you folks will do the same, because Lord knows we need great local news and community storytelling, and that's exactly what Mountain State Spotlight does. My friends here, Michael Lipton's going to play the guitar. My daughter, Virginia Gross, is going to be playing the viola, and Ted Harrison is going to be playing the bass. And we're going to do a song, seems like a metaphor for a lot of things these days. It's called When the Mist Clears Away. 1, 2, 3. The other morning at the sunrise, when the mist was on the hills and all around, I saw a beautiful gray-haired woman on the road as I drove into town. I pulled over and I asked her if I could give her a lift upon her way. She said, "No, thank you. I'm almost home now. I'll be all right when the mist clears away. Let the sunlight break through the darkness and let the night turn to beautiful day. Don't let the shadows turn into mountains. You'll be all right when the mist clears away." The other evening, long past the sundown, when the neon lights are flashing in the night, I saw a young man sit on a doorstep. That man was a pitiful sight. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands were trembling. I hesitated as I thought I heard him say, "I know you lose some, gotta hope you win some. You'll be alright when the mist clears away. Let the sunlight break through the darkness and let the night turn to beautiful day. Don't let the shadows turn into mountains. You'll be alright when the mist clears away." I've been lonely, I've been angry. Sometimes I don't know just which way to turn. Well, I've been lazy, I've been jealous. Sometimes, you know, I think I'll never learn. But deep inside me, if I listen, there's a tiny voice always seems to say, "Don't be mistaken, you're not forsaken. You'll be alright when the mist clears away. Let the sunlight break through the darkness and let the night turn to beautiful day. Don't let the shadow turn into mountains. You'll be alright when the mist clears away."
All right.
Thank you.
Round of applause for all of our storytellers tonight. Thank you all again for being here tonight. This was very much an experiment. We didn't know how it was going to go. We were worried about the Wi-Fi. And I, at the end of this, am feeling really good. It might be because I'm drinking a big timber as we do it, but this has been fun and amazing, and you guys have made it that way. We are going to go into breakout rooms now, so feel free to hang around and chat. It'll be super casual. We want to know where you are in the state or outside of it. We want you to ask our journalists and our storytellers questions, or just connect with people around the room if you're up for it. So again, thank you. You can find us at mountainstatespotlight.org, and we hope to see you again next time.